Hello, welcome to my channel. So I'm going to be producing a series of videos this summer that are more formal, more produced, about sort of introducing homeschooling to a Jewish audience, which a lot of people are interested in at the moment for obvious reasons. We're like in the middle of COVID-19 in 2020, and a lot of people are thinking about homeschooling for the first time. And so keep your eye on YouTube for those videos. There's someone editing those videos. They're going to be a lot more formal. They're not going to be me sitting here Indian style talking about books, but I wanted to do that right now because I actually have about a half an hour because my baby's nap is running long. And so I'm just going to do it. Why not? I'm going to jump into this whole YouTube thing whole hog. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about living books. And so the philosophy that we follow in our homeschool is called Charlotte Mason. Charlotte Mason was an educator in England, 19th century. She's dead. It's very sad. But she wrote a volume of books, which you can see right there. And we follow her philosophy. I have a blog called jewishcharlottemason.com, which is in the links on my YouTube channel if you want to go check it out. The videos that I'm going to be producing this summer about sort of homeschooling 101 are not about Charlotte Mason. So anyone, any interest whatsoever in homeschooling will be interested in those videos. But this specifically, I wanted to create a YouTube video about Jewish living books, and specifically about anthologies of Jewish stories. So this is something that that I have struggled trying to find in the homeschooling sphere, especially in the Jewish or in the Charlotte Mason world. There's so many resources for living books, and if you want to learn sort of more about what a living book is, my favorite resource is a podcast called A Delectable Education, and one of their first episodes is about living books. The way that I describe living books is they're kind of they're stories that stick with you and make you think and make you sort of, they touch your heart. And so, for example, Superworm is not a living book. It's a fun story. I love Julia Donaldson. The Snail and the Whale, not a deep book. It's fun. There's a place for that in the world. But a living book is something that sort of speaks to your soul a little bit, in my opinion. Other people have much better definitions than I do. But sort of the books that you remember from your childhood that you still think about sometimes, and that do that to you. That out of fondness, out of sadness, that sort of touched you deep in your soul. And so I just have a pile of books that we have that you might remember. The Velveteen Rabbit, Uncle Remus, The Little Red Hen is a living book. The Chalkbox Kid maybe is a living book. The Wind in the Willows is definitely a living book. You might remember reading Charlotte's Web and crying when you were a kid. I remember reading Charlotte's Web, and it's funny, when I was reading it again with my kids a couple months ago, and I cried again. But I remembered the names of the characters before we got to it, and it sticks with you in the back of your head, and you never get rid of those stories. And those stories, to me, are the formation of your character in a really deep, impactful way. And so I strongly believe in the importance of stories in education, and that's something that I really wanted to emphasize in our homeschool, because I think they're really valuable, and there's so much out there. I mean, Jews love stories. It's what we do. We love sort of using stories to talk about our faith. And so I have a problem, and my husband can attest to it. I love anthologies of Jewish short stories, and I love fables, I love folktales, I love all of those things because they are very Charlotte Mason, but there's a lot of stuff out there for Jewish families, and this is something, there's a blog and a podcast and a book. Let me see if I have it actually. I told you this was going to be unproduced. I don't see it. I might have lent it out. It's called the Read Aloud Revival, and it's a fantastic resource. The book, the podcasts, the blog, everything. And she talks about the importance of reading out loud for your kids' education. And it's something that I deeply, deeply believe. Jim Trelease also has an amazing book. What is it called? Gosh. I knew that I owned it. Anyway, Jim Trelease wrote a book along those lines. So if you Google or look on Amazon for Read Aloud Revival, his book, it's like orange and blue, Jim Trelease. He has an incredible book about the impact of reading out loud. And this is something that Jewish families can invest in without being homeschoolers. I think every family should be reading out loud to their children, no matter what their ages are, about 30 minutes a day. And so I wanted to sort of go through the resources that I've cultivated over the years of Jewish short stories that we love and we read together as a family a couple times a week. And they're beautiful. They're beautiful stories. And so some of these we've read, some of these we haven't read. I'm going to go through them from my favorite to just some other resources that I found. You can find these things on Better WorldBooks, Thriftbooks. Amazon has a great used section. A lot of these books are, I think almost all of these books are out of print, so you might have luck at a book sale for your shul or for your local library. That's where I found a lot of these things. So let me start going through them. So this is my favorite one. It's called Jewish Stories One Generation Tells Another, and they're retold by Penina Sharam. It's big. This is how far we are. The stories are short. They're about 7 pages, and they really, they go through sort of, deep moral questions that are sort of answered within a Jewish context. So that's one of my favorite options. This is, I think, my favorite Jewish writer along these lines. His name is Isaac Bashevis Singer. This book is called Stories for Children. There are so many books by him. If you go on Better WorldBooks and Google and go through his name, he has so many books, and this book is not big enough, and that's my only complaint. Some of the stories can be a little on the longer side, so it can be hard for like 5-year-old or younger to sort of follow along with, but we're still talking about some of these stories that we read 6 months ago because they're so deeply impactful. Here's a couple of other sort of shorter options for you. 52 story, a year of Jewish stories, 52 tales for children and their families. So one a week, by Grace Reges Mazel. It's beautifully illustrated, and that's one of the really nice things. This is one of the illustrations, really beautiful illustrations. And that's something that the other 2 books don't have. So this is definitely one that I recommend, especially if you have kids who love illustrations. This is a really old book, Treasury of Jewish Folklore. The stories are really short, and they're broken up into different parts. Jewish salt, heroes, holy men, parables, riddle solvers, miracles, fighters and strong men, the human comedy, rogues and sinners, the world to come, tales and legends, biblical sidelines, folktales, animal tales, songs and dances, which is like sort of a fun little subsection, religious songs. So anyway, this is big, and it's a fun read. I recommend sort of jumping through it a little bit, so you're not reading about like sinners. if you do these like every day, you're not like just reading like months and months about bad people. Don't do that. Another great book by David Patterson, Greatest Jewish Stories, from the Bible, Talmud, Midrash, Kabbalah, folk, Hasidic, and modern. So really spans and they're pretty short. Maybe for a little bit older audiences, but they are really short. So another option is 101 Jewish Read Aloud Stories. you can't find the cover for it, but it's edited and retold by Barbara Diamond Golden, who again is a great writer. You should check her out if you're interested in Jewish stories, because she has other resources that are fantastic. This is a great book for younger kids. If you have kids in like the 5 or 6 year old realm, this is a great book. I cannot personally attest to this, but I had a problem and so I bought it. Great Jewish Women. So these stories are also short, and there's some sort of short, there's some small illustrations that are black and white that are pretty, but it's pretty simple. I remember pre-reading this and it was like good for like an older girl, maybe like 7, 8, 9, 10, I think is a good estimate. So my oldest is not quite there yet, so that's why I haven't really read it, but it looks great. 3 similar options. Great Jewish Short Stories, A Treasury of Jewish Stories, and Jewish Folktales. So this is edited and introduced by Saul Bellow, and it's a treasury, so it has stories in here from the best. They all seem to be named Isaac. Isaac Babel, Isaac Rosenfeld, and Isaac Basheva Singer, who I spoke about earlier. There's also Shalom Aleichem in here, which he's a great children's, like not just children's, but he's a great writer. So if you're looking for other authors, he's fantastic as well. Philip Roth is in here a lot more. This is a good one. I recommend this one. Treasury of Jewish Stories and Jewish Folktales by Gerald Friedlander. It's a good one as well. One other one that is from my husband's grandmother, who I adored. I pulled off of her shelf when his grandparents passed away. Seth and I were given the option to go through the house and pick out a few things that we wanted, and we both went straight for the bookshelves. And this is something that I picked, A Treasury of Yiddish Stories. So whenever I read this, I think about Bubby. There's a couple other books that I wanted to introduce. We use these for sort of supplementation of the daily Parsha, the daily Bible reading in the beginning months of the year when the stories are a lot more interesting. It's true. It's a Beautiful Garden and Other Bible Tales by Elma Elric Levenger. This is one you're gonna have to find somewhere, because it's hard to find. And unfortunately, they're not listed by the name of the Parsha, so you have to go through and label them, which is annoying. But the illustrations are pretty, and they're a great sort of more digestible way of reading the Parsha for younger kids, like 6, 7, 5-ish. This is another one by Barbara Golden, the one that I referred to earlier. Journeys with Elijah, 8 Tales of the Prophet. And it's beautifully, beautifully illustrated. I love this book. This is a good one. Another book is also by Penina Shram, The Chosen Tales, Stories Told by Jewish Storytellers. This is great. I love this book. So it goes through the stories of some famous Jewish storytellers. I love it. Another one that I highly recommend is The Classic Tales, 4,000 Years of Jewish Lore by Ellen Frankel. And again, it's long. The stories are about 3 or 4 pages, and they're organized by, in the beginning, from Ur to Egypt, from slavery to freedom, in the days of the judges, David and Solomon, Tales of the Second Commonwealth, the sages of the Talmud, in diaspora, the Hasidic period, Tales of Elijah and the Prophet, lots of folk tales too. So this is great also to supplement any Parsha stuff that you have. A lot of stuff in here in the beginning is great. And just generally, it's a good, like, quick bedtime read that really, it's a great Jewish read. And the last one I have, we haven't delved into yet, but it came recommended, Leaves from the Garden of Eden. And these stories are, again, like 3, 4, 5 pages. And there's 100 stories in here. Folk tales, mystical tales, supernatural tales, fairy tales. A lot of Charlotte Mason focuses on folk tales and fables, and a lot of that stuff can be Christian, and so these are a lot of Jewish options. I think that there's so much value in learning about folk tales and learning about fables, and it's so woven into our society and our cultures, plural, American, Jewish, everything. And it's so important for kids to have a basis of understanding these stories that sort of transcribed. I told you this wasn't produced. They sort of go beyond. Let's do that. They go beyond sort of the story itself, and they teach a deeper lesson, and I think that's so valuable. So anyway, these are some of my favorite books along these lines. If you have recommendations, I'm always buying them, so please let me know. Please subscribe and click like. I think that's what I'm supposed to say. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to chat with you guys again soon.